Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna talk about the history of the vampires in the literature. To start with, we gotta define what is a vampire and what are the characteristics that makes them a vampire. A vampire is a creature often represented with two elongated fangs, with pale skin tone, and with the capacity to transform themselves into bats. Well, this hasn't been like this always. There has been many representations of vampires through the years. And now I'm gonna talk about them. Starting between the years 1720 and 1730, where vampires were represented as creatures created by Satan to destroy communities and to drink innocent one's blood. Then, in the year 1748, vampires were represented as erotic creatures, full of anger and always looking for young ladies. Later on, in the year 1847, uh, this is where the trope of vampires started, or the archetype of vampires as we know it nowadays. What I'm saying with this is that people started to see vampires as creatures with two elongated fangs that always leave two puncture wounds in the necks of their victims. This is later or after they drink their bloods. They were creatures that enters through the windows and they are always were attacking like young ladies that were sleeping. Vampires at this time were represented with hypnotic powers, with superhuman strength, and in contrast to the vampires as we know it nowadays, vampires don't get affected by the sunlight, by crosses, or by garlic. They also can eat and drink human food. Um, in the year 1897, vampirism was considered a disease. This resonated with a Victorian England that was under a plague of the tuberculosis and syphilis. Symptoms of these diseases were related to vampirism. Now, I'm gonna talk about some literary works since the first appearance of the vampires in the history. So, the first time that the word vampire appeared or was used was in an English writing. It was a compilation known as the Harleian Miscellany in the year 1734. The first writing, or a first full book, of which is known, of course, that treat exclusively the topic of vampirism, is entitled The Vampire. This was written in the year 1748 by the German author Heinrich Ossenfelder. Another nearby poem that deal with the subject of vampirism was The Bride of the Corinth. This was written in the year 1797, and this was written by Johann Wolfgang van Goethe. Later on, in the year 1813, Dr. Lord Byron wrote an epic poem of vampires named The Giaour. In the year 1847, there was published a short novel named as Penny Dreadful, or Barney the Vampire of the Feast, or the Feast of the Blood. This book was published by the authors James Malcolm Rimmer and Thomas Becket Prest. Then, in the year 1872, a novel named Carmilla was published. The author of this book, was Sheridan Le Fanu. This book was important because in this book were treated taboo topics such as lesbianism, alcohol, and things that weren't explored at the time in other books. Then, in the year 1897, Bram Stoker published the famous book named Dracula. This is the best known book or novel of vampires. This started with the vampires as we know it nowadays. They related the vampires as we know it nowadays, and we started to use the name Dracula. Years later, in the year 1922, there was a movie, a film that wrote back this book, Dracula, and this was the first time where a vampire were exposed to the society in a public theater. These are some, of course, some years that or the most relevant ones. There are, of course, more books, more movies, more history to know about, but this is like the strongest one, and that the ones that we have to know to get a context of the importance and the history of the vampires. I hope you like this talk and that you have learned about vampires. Thank you so much.